Iran keeps striking American bases in the region. Iran keeps funding militias across the Middle East. Iran keeps defying ultimatums, surviving pressure campaigns, and outlasting every prediction of its collapse. And it's doing all of this while living under some of the most punishing economic sanctions ever imposed on any country in modern history. So how is that possible? How does a nation this isolated, this restricted, this cut off from the global financial system still manage to stay on its feet? The answer is floating somewhere out in the open ocean. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's start with the basics. Iran sits on top of some of the largest proven oil and natural gas reserves on the planet. Energy exports, oil and gas combined, make up somewhere between 60 and 80% of the country's total government revenue. That's not just an important number. That is the number. Without that income, Iran can't pay its military. It can't fund Hezbollah. It can't bankroll the Houthis in Yemen. It can't do much of anything. So when the U.S. and European nations began tightening sanctions, especially after 2018, when the Trump administration pulled out of the nuclear deal and reimposed sweeping restrictions, the stated goal was clear: cut off Iran's oil money, and you cut off Iran's power. It hasn't worked. And here's why. Out in international waters, somewhere between the Persian Gulf, the Indian Ocean, and the South China Sea, something is happening that doesn't show up on most official trade records. Two tankers meet in the middle of the ocean. No port, no customs officer, no paper trail. One of those tankers is carrying Iranian crude oil. The other might be flying the flag of Malaysia or Oman or somewhere else entirely. The two ships pull alongside each other, connect their hoses, and the oil moves from one vessel to the other. This is called a ship-to-ship transfer, and it's been a standard smuggling technique for years, but it gets more sophisticated than that. Before these transfers happen, the tankers often turn off their AIS transponders. That's the automatic identification system, the maritime equivalent of a GPS tracker that lets authorities follow ships in real time. When you turn that off, the vessel effectively disappears from the map. Satellite surveillance can still catch them sometimes, but it's a game of cat and mouse on a very, very large ocean. And then there's the rebranding. Once the oil is on the new ship, the paperwork changes. The country of origin gets relabeled. Iranian crude that left Karg Island can, by the time it reaches its destination, appear on documents as oil from Malaysia or Iraq or the UAE. The cargo is the same. The story attached to it is completely different. This is what analysts and sanctions experts call the shadow fleet, a network of aging, often uninsured tankers, shell companies, and opaque ownership structures designed specifically to move sanctioned oil without leaving a traceable footprint. Now here's where this story takes a turn that has significant geopolitical implications. Who is buying all of this oil? China. Not a little bit of it. Not as a side transaction. According to multiple analyses from energy research firms and think tanks tracking Iranian exports, China is purchasing roughly 85% of Iran's total oil exports. 85%. To understand why, you have to understand the incentives on both sides. Iran needs buyers. It can't sell its oil through normal channels, through the SWIFT banking system, through major international trading houses, through Western insurance networks. So it accepts a discount. Iranian crude typically sells at a significant markdown compared to global benchmark prices. Some estimates put that discount at anywhere from $5 to $13 per barrel below market rate. For China, that's a deal worth taking. China is the world's largest importer of crude oil. Cheap energy feeds its manufacturing base. And since these purchases aren't going through Western financial infrastructure, China faces limited exposure to secondary sanctions, the penalties. The U.S. tries to impose on third parties who do business with Iran. The transactions often flow through small Chinese private refineries called teapot refineries, rather than through the major state-owned companies that have more to lose from U.S. scrutiny. Payment sometimes happens in Chinese yuan, through intermediary banks, or in arrangements that deliberately avoid dollar-denominated transactions. It's not elegant, but it works. Step back for a moment and look at what this system actually represents. Iran gets revenue, real, substantial revenue that keeps its government funded, its military operational, and its regional influence intact despite some of the most aggressive economic pressure ever applied to a single country. China gets discounted energy. In a global market where energy prices have been volatile and geopolitical supply risks are constant, having a reliable, cheap source of crude oil has real strategic value. Neither side officially acknowledges the full extent of what's happening. Iran doesn't publish its actual export volumes. China doesn't list Iran as a top oil supplier in its customs data in any straightforward way. The whole system operates in a gray zone, not quite legal under international sanctions frameworks, not quite illegal enough to trigger a military response. And in that gray zone, the sanctions meant to be a decisive economic weapon lose much of their bite. For Washington, this is a serious and ongoing headache. The Biden administration tried to walk a careful line enforcing some sanctions, while also attempting to revive the nuclear deal. The Trump administration, both in its first and second terms, pushed for maximum pressure, but neither approach has stopped the oil from flowing. Sanctions experts have increasingly argued that without a mechanism to actually stop Chinese purchases, which would require directly confronting Beijing, not Tehran, the economic pressure on Iran will remain, at best, partial. The secondary sanctions threat exists on paper, but when the buyer is China, a country with which the U.S. has trillions of dollars in trade and deep financial entanglements, the leverage is complicated. So the next time you hear that Iran has launched another strike, funded another militia, or defied another ultimatum, and you wonder how a country under this much economic pressure can keep doing it, remember those two tankers meeting quietly in the middle of the ocean. The signals are off, the paperwork says something else, and the oil keeps moving.